Good morning. I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. It's time for the Kickstarter discussion and what awaits Uganda's NAM chairmanship tenure. Now, the non-aligned movement, the organization that brings at least 120 countries together, has had the curtains fall on a major gathering here in the country on Saturday. And in that regard, Uganda was granted the opportunity to lead for the next tenure, and President Museveni effectively received the reins of that position and will steer matters when it comes to anything that has to be dealt with within the confines of the non-aligned movement. The history of the organization has been widely touted, and of course at this time there is need to recondition the workings of the system in order to put those countries in the global south and everything that they fight for on the front, including aspects that have been touted. The fact that the United Nations working system does not favor, and that there is need to begin to hear the voices of the global south. But what is in it for us, and what does the president intend to embark on? With me, I have Ambassador Henry Mayiga. He's the Consulate General in Dubai for Uganda. I'm also joined on site by Dr. Bireete. She is the Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance, but also one of the firebrand political and seasoned analysts in the country. There's something interesting that I would start with, but let me shield it for now. Let me go to Ambassador Henry Mayiga first, because he now speaks and represents the government on Morning at NTV this very morning. Ambassador, the Non-Aligned Movement Summit has effectively been the signature event for a series of iconic gatherings that the country is still actually going through. But let's leave the IGAD and the G77 plus China apart and concentrate on the non-aligned movement. The curtains fell on that particular conference on Saturday, with President Museveni taking on the reins as the chairman. What is in it for us, given the fact that we now are on the steering wheel?
Absolutely. In my view, it's a diplomatic coup.
Diplomatic coup?
Absolutely it is.
Wow.
Because the rest of the world, I mean parts of the world, especially in the West, have sought to isolate this country. You and I know that just recently we were excommunicated from the AGOA trade union, and of course the sanctions that have been imposed on this country. Uganda, in my view, attempts by some to isolate this country and make it a pariah state on the international scene. So by NAM coming to the city, by, I'm sorry, I have to mention quite a couple of others, meetings which have been going on in Kampala. The Commonwealth of the speakers of the Commonwealth Conference, which was held successfully here, the G77 and the IGAD and so on, just for purposes of mentioning those. In my view, it's a diplomatic coup on the international scene that Uganda is not an isolated country, and that the leadership of this country definitely is doing its job. It's equal to the job. And of course you remember how Uganda voted during the UN vote in as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We were neutral, and we explained to the public and to the rest of it, including all those who wanted to listen to us, that neutrality is extremely important for purposes of planning for taking over the chairmanship of NAM, which you have now effectively actually taken over. And it's good that you're asking what are the benefits out of this thing. But before I even go into those benefits, I just wanted to underscore the fact that NAM is an organization, as the public knows, over 100 and now 21 countries, plus of course South Sudan, which has just joined.
That's right.
That community, 20 observer states, and also 10 observer international organizations. So it's really a collection of so many things together that matter so much for our country. And therefore, by President Museveni, the best president, so to speak, since independence of this country. Taking over the leadership of NAM in the subsequent 3 years, in my view, means quite a lot of things. You must have been following the discussions and the agreements and the things that were agreed on during the forum, the business forum, and information coming out from the Uganda Investment Authority shows that up to something like $1 billion in terms of investments are expected as a result of us having these meetings. And so, in my view, and these are going to create jobs, and there are so many other spin-offs. And so by President Museveni taking over the leadership of NAM for the rest of the time, I mean for the subsequent 2 or so years, is an extremely important opportunity for this country in terms of MICE, that is meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions. That showcasing this country that it's possible to have all these kinds of meetings in this part of the world is an extremely important opportunity for us, because I mean there are so many spin-offs as far as that is concerned.
All right, interesting submissions there, but of course this is something that I'll capitalize on a little bit later when you talk about MICE, meetings, incentives and conferences as well as exhibitions, whether there is a deliberate attempt to take Uganda towards the ability to host as many as we can, while of course neglecting some aspects of service delivery. But that's a conversation that we shall of course infuse a little bit later. Dr. Bireete, NAM has numbed some Ugandans. Earlier when I was starting the show, I was asking the question, for those that haven't been the direct service providers in terms of catering and provision of printing services for designing of many of the catalogs that are used at these conferences, they could be struggling to understand exactly what NAM is, what it should be and what it ought to be. In your own workings in the civil society, conferences are pretty much an everyday thing. You know how it trickles, especially when it comes to the benefits aspects to the local or layman. Could you put this into context for us? Of course, first your view of what this is all about, what it has been, but how does the conference structure and architecture trickle into the layman's economy?
Good morning, viewers. Mr. Moderator, allow me to first convey my condolences to the family of Honorable Cecilia Ogwal and the giant that has signed out from the women movement, the bold and resilient giant that spoke truth to power and pursued whatever she believed in, regardless of the repercussions. And on behalf of the women movement of Uganda, we grieve with the family, and we wish Honorable Cecilia Ogwal to, eternal rest. Yeah, now is a good opportunity for Uganda. The non-aligned movement is a space where basically the developing countries are free to pursue their interests without allying to either West or East. Yeah. And that neutral space in the past has been used to advocate for end of apartheid in South Africa as one of the key achievements, but also independence and national sovereignty for the other countries, especially coming out of colonialism, and those that were still occupied, like Zimbabwe and others. We grew up seeing NAM as a very important platform, but along the way it went silent. It went silent because majority of the member states, the now 121 member states of NAM, have 3 common characteristics. One common characteristic of these countries is bad governance and abuse of human rights. The second common characteristic is weak economies. And the third common characteristic is high levels of poverty and corruption. That builds into the second, the weak economies. So I saw the comments of the dignitaries. I followed through the NAM summit, And I was also privileged to attend the women side event for the NAM Summit and the Kampala Women Declaration. The main issue today is how relevant is NAM. Of course, ideally, NAM is very important and relevant, but how viable are the national member states to make NAM important in the global alliance, in the global economic trends today? I want to give an example, a common example that will be easily understood by the ordinary people. If you had an LC chairman at your village, and this LC chairman beats his wife every night, would you look towards the leadership of that chairman? So the national context of these member states in NAM is what will either make Uganda's leadership relevant or irrelevant. If NAM is the biggest grouping in the UN. If the UN agencies are debating the conduct, the abuse of human rights in your country, the kidnaps, the missing persons that you are presiding over in your own country, how respectable will you be in the same forum as you front for the bigger picture of non-aligned movement? So the national context is very important. The viability of the states that compose NAM is very important. And in international law, it depends on the country that is speaking. For example, I want to give the example of the superpowers, of course. If UN, let's look at the permanent members of the UN Security Council, because that was part of the agenda for NAM. If any of the permanent member states of the UN Security Council speaks, the world listens, because they are considered as viable states. If you bring the whole of NAM together, I know we have the Latin America, China, and the others. China is G77. We have the Cuba that is really taking lead in medical diplomacy globally. We have upcoming nations that can really speak and the world listens. But if you're there and you cannot account for your citizens, if you cannot, the number one agenda, if you look at President Museveni's address to NAM, the number one principle of NAM is fundamental rights and freedoms. The president underscored it in his own speech as number one principle of NAM. How are we scoring on the number one principle of NAM? As the chairman now of NAM, can we account for the fundamental rights and freedoms of Ugandans? Can we account for the sovereign rights of Ugandans?
That effort has been underway, and you can take the words of the president on some occasions as to aspects of human rights being handled as they ought to be handled.
Thank you, but as I said, this is a good opportunity for Uganda, either to rewrite their history,
okay,
in terms of abuse of human rights, in terms of sham elections, because sovereign rights go with the free and fair elections. In terms of building a viable economy, because the other characteristic of non-member states, they are choking on public debt, including Uganda.
Before we go to the aspects that are very economic, let me just get to Ambassador Mayiga to respond to some of the aspects that you've put through. You spoke about the fact that this has been a diplomatic coup for Uganda on account that it has been widely seen to be a pariah on the international stage. And the reason is simple: human rights. And those are the concerns that have been brought about by the global capitals like Washington and London, as, for example, the delisting from AGOA, issues of human rights. Do you see a reason and a perfect opportunity for President Museveni to embark on rewriting that particular part of the script?
No, actually what I said is that there are some on the international scene that would have wanted Uganda to be looked at as a pariah state. I didn't say that it is a pariah state. because even when it comes to the human rights,
That's interesting.
I think I was very categorical about that one. When it comes to human rights, I don't know how some people, especially the opposition, would want to look at these human rights. But as far as I know, and as far as Uganda has been moving from especially 1986, it has become exceedingly clear that this country is on a trajectory which is very promising in terms of protection of human rights, because I'm not aware of a government that has protected human rights in this country like the one which we have at the moment. And let me expound on that. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as what I've been seeing, because I've been inhabiting this country for the last 60 years, and therefore I think I'm competent enough to make comparisons between the past and the present. What has been happening in this country is that in the past, for instance, before 1986 and thereabout, there were no predictable and regular elections, for instance. Yeah, I think that one we have to agree. That was not a given in the past, because change of government was by takeovers and coups and so on and so forth. Right now, as we speak, we have predictable and regular elections. And we have also parties that are operational in this country. That is a given now, because nobody can take away that, right, that you belong to a political party. As long as the parties also remain within the realm of respectability in terms of, the law in this country, you are going definitely
remain within the realm of respectability.
Absolutely. The moment you overstep those bounds, the moment you overstep those bounds, definitely there is going to
exercise of freedom.
But as far as exercise of freedom is also given, as long as, because there is a procedure, of course I'm aware that, for instance, people have been complaining about their meetings being interrupted and all these kinds of things. But as far as I know is that there is a procedure how you should have these meetings. And as far as the NRM is concerned, I've seen actually them requesting for that permission to be granted so that they can have these meetings. So if others in this country, on the political platform in this country, or should I say, political parties in this country that really want to have these meetings and they don't want to go to take that path, then that is their shauri. It is not, the law is very clear about those things. So it's extremely important for us to realize that actually as far as protection of human rights, and I mean, look at the pieces of legislation that we have at the moment, and also the institutions that have been put in place in order to protect people's human rights in this country, to the extent that we are now gross recipients, or should I say net recipients, of refugees from other countries. Whereas in the past, because of the bad governments that we had, people were actually leaving the country. At the moment, people are just coming to our country as refugees. But we are not having, exiles like we used to have in the past. And I think that's a plus. So I'm not surprised that actually NAM came here because of that very strict protection of human rights. Yes, there are still some areas probably that need improvement, I agree. But in as far as Uganda is concerned at the moment, when you compare it with the past, we are doing very well in as far as that's concerned. So this stamp of approval, in my view, of the Yoweri Museveni administration and also our country, to chair these meetings for the next 2 years is a stamp of approval.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Gentleman and lady, we shall be taking a break, but when we return, the questions will be very straightforward. On the part of Dr. Sarah Bireete, what should the president, in his capacity as the chairperson of the non-aligned movement now and going forward, should concentrate on, especially when it comes to aspects of Uganda's foreign policy, our trade interests, and the push for the greater good of the Ugandan. Ambassador Mayiga, you heard the president speak in his speech at the opening, and of course everything that has come up within the communique or declaration. Do we have the mantle or the capacity to actually see through some of these aspects of the declaration? Why am I asking that? Because on the international scene, we are looked at by the West as people who are simply posturing. If you cannot do certain specific aspects to reorganize yourselves, how do you expect to be respected? Those questions will be answered when we come back from the break.
At NTV.
Welcome back. We're glad you're still watching. It's the Kickstarter, and we are discussing what awaits Uganda's NAM chairmanship tenure. Of course, having had President Museveni take on the reins of the organization from the president of Azerbaijan. Before we went into the break, I'd posed questions to my guests. That is Dr. Bireete, Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance, and Ambassador Henry Mayiga, the Consul General in Dubai for Uganda. The questions were very direct. I do not know whether they can be heard in any way. Dr. Bireete, the president has taken on the chairmanship without looking at what the president might have failed at, especially within the confines of Uganda, aspects including ensuring absolute human rights observance. What should be his thrust? What should he look at? I know the declaration gives him a bit of leverage on what he should focus on, but you have spoken extensively and sometimes very harshly of what the president ought to do. What would you have the president do now that he's the chairman?
At the global stage, I expect President Museveni's leadership under NAM to help achieve peace for Palestine.
Okay.
The question of Palestine has been central, the independence of Palestine, to the NAM movement for a long time. The days of, I personally got to know about NAM during the days of Arafat fighting for the independence of Palestine.
Yes,
and
yes,
the
Arafat,
unequivocal voice and stand of the non-aligned movement.
That's right.
As we talk today, the crisis in Gaza has caused untold suffering, untold humanitarian crisis, and it is a shame that the world leaders are watching on as the butchering in Gaza goes on, reasons notwithstanding. The first win for me is if NAM could achieve the ceasefire and the two-state solution under President Museveni's leadership. We shall all salute that leadership.
Wow.
The second issue under NAM is the issue of reforms, UN reforms, and the UN Security Council reforms. They are long overdue. They are long overdue. For me, the African states that would really, people like saying which state do you then put at the UN Security Council? South Africa, which is leading the International Court of Justice case for Palestine. Nigeria are some other two examples I would front for the permanent seat at the UN Security Council for Africa. But those reforms are necessary, whether the seat comes to South Africa, to Africa or not. The reforms are necessary.
Yeah.
And that's part of what the chairmanship should push.
So the general conduct of business in New York at the United Nations ought to change?
No, but the UN since 1954, really, it is important to discuss reforms, what has worked, what has not worked.
Yeah.
Let them evaluate. The global dynamics have changed. So those reforms are long overdue. And they should happen. The other agendas under NAM include the economic, the trade first among NAM member states, but also it goes hand in hand with the productivity of the citizens in these member states. How viable are the national economies? When the UN Secretary General was talking about the national context. So for me, these NAM member states need to have that inward focus, and they should be intentional about it in order to produce, to create that viability and credibility of each member state. And the question of public debt, of course, if you look at the member states choking on public debt, there should be a debate on public debt. Can it be cancelled? That was one of the specific recommendations from the UN, the women side meeting. It was cancellation of debt, but also fair trade. So we continue to advocate for fair trade, but also cancellation of debt and maybe reforms in the international financial systems and economic infrastructure. But that can only make sense if these member states can deliberately be intentional and productive of their citizens, but also reduce corruption and wastage. Because Uganda has benefited from debt cancellation twice. But we are at 98 trillion debt or above. So, is there value for money, first of all, in this debt we are accumulating? 2, are we borrowing money to pay salaries and wages for a bloated government infrastructure? We have been dealing with the reforms at the national level and the rationalization of agencies. But also we need to reduce the size of government. We need to reduce the size of parliament. We need to stop creating unviable districts and administrative units that take so much money in administration instead of service delivery. So that's the viability and national context that must be dealt with in these member states for the reforms to make sense.
Ambassador Mayiga, Dr. Sarah Bireete talks just about everything that was deliberated upon at the NAM. And I'm sure President Museveni has that on as one of the scripts in that tray as chairman right now. But the greater context, especially with regard to the question I want you to answer, is how will NAM afford the global south the respect to speak at the global stage and make things move? Because that is very important. The ability, for example, for a borrower to begin to demand for a change in the financial architecture that favors him, despite the fact that he continues to behave badly when it comes to debt repayment. How are we going to achieve that?
Absolutely. I am not very conversant about the tools that NAM has, especially when it comes to the international stage, at the UN to be specific, whether legal or financial muscle and so much, and so many other options that one can look at. I'm not particularly very aware about because NAM, in my view, was created, as we have agreed, after Second World War, to respond to what was happening at that time. Decolonization, fighting imperialism, non-interference in other states' affairs, and all sorts of things. So, but at the same time, we are talking about 55% of the global community that is represented by NAM. And it is also part and parcel of the UN. And NAM is the second biggest international organization after the UN in terms of numbers of member states. And therefore, in my view, that puts NAM at a pedestal where probably its voice becomes much stronger, especially when they are talking together at the UN. And therefore, I want to believe that given the fact that even President Museveni is respected so much, even including the part of the world where I actually work, is especially after we passed the anti-homosexuality bill in Tulo, and it was signed in Tulo, and all these kinds of things. All those things brought a lot of respect to President Museveni and also our country. That is for a fact. And so NAM, in my view, has a responsibility to carry out in terms of all sorts of problems, global problems that we have. And therefore, this voice, in my view, which is now getting galvanized, especially given the many problems that we have at the international stage, is extremely important. And once that voice, as I have seen it happen in Kampala, our capital city, if it is replicated at the international scene, especially at the UN, so that people work together, all these things which, the Kampala Declaration talks about so many things, which NAM is going to work on in the subsequent 3 years. Extremely important. You're talking about, for instance, that UN Security Council, and I was happy that Trump the other day, when he was still president of the US, was talking about reforming the UN, which is something that probably should have been done much earlier. So we are talking about reforming the UN, we are talking about the global conflicts. You can talk about Ukraine and Russia, Gaza and Israel, and so many other hotspots on the globe, like in Southern Sudan, in Sudan itself, and the simmering problem that probably seems to be happening between Ethiopia and Somalia. All these things put together, climate change and so on. When you look at the Kampala Declaration after the NAM meeting in Kampala, it has quite a number of action points. And I believe that if the voice which I've had of NAM, it's a very strong voice in our capital city, if it can be replicated at the UN, level. I am sure that we are definitely going to get there, because also the chairman is equal to the job. The chairman of NAM now for the subsequent 2 years is equal to the job. And if that voice is replicated the way I see it in Kampala at the UN level, I'm sure definitely we'll get there.
Okay, I like the prayer that you just dished out. There is a tendency for African leaders to love the photo opportunity, the grandstanding and the ability to speak like actually the next day they will do something as they say. However, we've seen things turn out different. Some of them completely go into diplomatic slumber, where fighting for the things that have been agreed on is relegated to the next meeting and the next NAM, for example, which if it happens that way, then it will be very, very detrimental. But if, for example, we have an opportunity to restructure the global financial architecture to our advantage, how should it be done? And I do not know exactly how we can tell the world, for example, that we want you to lend money to us this way, you know, because that's exactly what we're trying to say when it comes to the debt question. We are in crisis, and many people, including those that sit at boards at IMF, now are reluctant. What I know right now is, like, for example, a lender, a private lender like BlackRock, one of the biggest and most I don't know how to describe, it's an economy on its own, despite the fact that it's a company, is the one lending money to countries. Because IMF and these others seem to be nervous about the fact that we consistently fail to pay the debt as we ought to pay it. What should change? You've spoken about the fact that reducing the cost of public administration could help us get that money and perhaps put it into aspects that kind of block us from getting more debt. But he's an ambassador. He's spoken to many people in the corridors of power. What is the discussion about debt restructuring?
I'll give you, first of all, I'll give an example, because you remember the road between Mbale and Soroti. At one point in time, the government of Uganda tried to borrow money from any one of these international organizations, IMF and World Bank. And at that time, World Bank said, no, there is no viable economic activity that going on, so we can't give you the money. And that is the architecture President Museveni was talking about, that look, for us, when we evaluate our country and the needs that we so much yearn for, and we say that this is the project that we think where you should put the money, that respect for that request, I think, is what the president was talking about, that the financial institutions. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that these financial institutions, IMF and World Bank, what they need to do is to ensure that when, they shouldn't give us money for consumptive, things like paying salaries and allowance and this kind of stuff. That one I agree. But when it comes to projects that can spur, for instance, regional integration and also regional development and regional balance, so to speak, that money should be given. And therefore, in as far as I'm concerned, those are some of the things that should be reformed in as far as the financial architecture that the President Museveni was talking about. Also, apart from that, I think I want to agree for the very first time with my sister here that these debts are choking so many, especially African countries. And therefore, the lending institutions, in my view, should probably make an attempt to ensure that they give us debt relief. Because if they don't, then the choking will continue. And once the choking continues, we will not make any headway in terms of economic development. But that apart from us looking for loans from other places, I think it's extremely important for us to instead increase FDI's inflow into our country and also trade. Once we do those two, then we will need less loans. All right. And that's what we are doing as diplomatic missions across the globe to ensure that we get as many of these things into our country, which is called economic and commercial diplomacy.
Just before you take us away, I'm wondering, Ambassador, don't you agree with me on Palestine and UN reforms?
No, you will be responding to that. You'll also be making a submission to what he has just said. Let me first go to my man on the ground, Stephen Mbide, for an update of exactly what's happening within Kampala, of course, in light of what could be disruptions to some, but mandatory ways of doing things, especially when you're hosting global leaders.
It's still a sad morning. I'm coming to you from Bugolobi at the home of Mr. Lamek Ogwal and the late now Honorable Cecilia Ogwal Atim Barbara, who, and any time from now, any moment from now, we're going to be setting off from here as the pallbearers from A+ Funeral Services, the family members of Forum for Democratic Change, and of course the friends of the late and the family are said to be proceeding towards the Parliament of Uganda, where the members of Parliament are going to be paying the last respects to their foreign colleague, Honorable Cecilia Ogwal. Of course, we know the send-off began officially yesterday after the body was received by Honorable Among Anita, the Speaker of Parliament, together with other members of Parliament, and some ministers received the body yesterday at Entebbe Airport, and now we're going to be led by the Uganda Police Brass Band that is also set here to be leading us to the Parliament of Uganda, where there will be a viewing by the members of Parliament at 9 a.m. and now the body starts the journey officially, a point of no return, because from here the body will be lying in state at Parliament of Uganda, and then from there tomorrow it will be proceeding to the All Saints Church Cathedral in Nakasero, and from there it will be making its way to Soroti and then connecting to Dokoro there for also another program that will also include special seating by members of Parliament, by all council leaders in Dokoro, where she has been the member of Parliament for Dokoro District as a woman member of Parliament, and that vehicle you see is the one that is carrying the body of the late Cecilia Ogwal. If Brian can move closer to where the casket that has the body is lying right now in that vehicle that belongs to A+ Funeral Services, that was given the mandate to carry the body until its final resting day, that will be on Saturday in Dokoro. But of course, members of Parliament are already lined up at Parliament of Uganda waiting to receive the body of the late Cecilia Ogwal, who is lying here. And of course this year she is the first member of Parliament who have lost. Of course we know that even last year Uganda lost another gallant son of Uganda, that is Honorable Charles Okelo Machodwogo, who was also the member of Parliament for Oyam North, and we saw that in 2022, that was March, we lost the Speaker of Parliament then, Right Honorable Jacobo Olanya, and this Cecilia Ogwal becomes the third member of Parliament we are losing in this term. But still a somber mood here as more family members gather here to still show respect and also say farewell to their mother, their son, and that is the body of the late Cecilia Ogwal, who is now making her way. The body is now making its way to Parliament of Uganda, where we're going to be seeing members of Parliament viewing the body from 9 to midday, and then we shall be having a special seating that where members of Parliament will be at least eulogizing the late Cecilia, gallant son, the gallant daughter, who has from across the political divide, everyone has been praising her for being a tough talker. In fact, even nicknamed her the Iron Lady, who could speak truth through power, who could at least voice any concern that concern the women, the young, the elderly, and they are the vehicle that is carrying the Uganda Police Brass Band, also making its way to Parliament of Uganda. We will be following this, and then as the body arrives at Parliament, we shall also be showing you how the mood at Parliament as the members of Parliament receive the body of the late Honorable Cecilia Imat Ogwal, who is now leaving her dear husband Lamek Ogwal in that sober mood, and the family, of course, the whole country, Dokolo, the global Africa, as well as the Pan-African Parliament is also mourning the late Cecilia Ogwal. Now we have to take you back to studio, and then we shall be showing you the mood at Parliament as the late Cecilia Ogwal, of course, the body touches down at Parliament of Uganda. I have now turned you back to Chris Igenyi. I'll be showing you later on what's happening at Parliament.
Thank you very much, Stephen Mbide, for that update, and of course we shall be looking forward to events as they will unfold when the body of the late Honorable Cecilia Ogwal lies in state at Parliament. Please, if you are around the Central Business District and you have some 30 minutes, it is imperative that you move and go to Parliament and also pay your respects to a giant of Uganda's political space. Her death was untimely, and for the very first time I do believe that it was indeed very untimely, but the nature of the circumstances that have come after the news began to filter through of her death in India is what has some people, especially within the political circles, some are scratching where it does not itch, others are giggling when they are not tickled. The fact that Cecilia Ogwal has united the country. There is a single voice celebrating the life of one person who brought her best game in the political space, but most importantly, ushered in a generation of leadership and politics that we need right now. Before we continue with the discussion on how debt restructuring should be done or undertaken by the Global South in order to be respected by the West, I would love to just take a minute or two to allow my guests pay their own tribute to Cecilia Ogwal, but most importantly, give us their views on the kind of legacy that she leaves behind. Ambassador Henry Mayiga.
Now, for me, I think it's particularly something slightly different because I worked with her when I was still in the opposition. I actually belonged to the Uganda People's Congress.
Okay.
When she was the chairman of the Presidential Policy Commission of UPC, which Obote had created in his absence while he was in exile in Zambia, Lusaka. And so I worked with her, and when they disagreed with Obote, she was removed from that chairmanship. Dr. James Rwanyare became the chairman, kind of pseudo-president of the UPC in Uganda, and I became the deputy. So as Rwanyare replaced her, I replaced Rwanyare.
Okay.
So that is the history which I have, and so it's really sad that she has left at a time when the country still needed her. And besides that one, she was somebody with a record in terms of familial responsibilities.
That's right.
She won the Beauty Queen contest in 1969.
Apparently
Uganda,
she was runner-up.
Apparently
she was runner-up.
She was runner-up, okay. Fine.
She rectified that misrepresentation.
But okay, because it had been recorded in history that she was actually the winner in the past. If she corrected it, then that's okay. But of course, she participated. She must have been a beauty.
Yeah, of course. Captivating indeed.
Her piercing voice, we will never forget it.
That's right.
Whenever she was on the floor of Parliament or any other political engagements, the voice was very commanding, and everybody had to listen to her. And she talked a lot of sense for many years on the political platform. And therefore, and of course, my regards to the family for the loss is extremely important. And also, because, you know, it is an African tradition that we respect those who are deceased, and I'm happy that that respect has been given by everybody across the political spectrum.
Dr. Bireete?
Well, for me, Honorable Cecilia Ogwal is among the very first women leaders that I got to see as a young girl. She came on the scene as the interim lead of UPC when I was in my lower secondary school. Her journey and then contesting for the Constituent Assembly, the reason she disagreed with the UPC establishment to go and contest on individual merit politics because she saw the need to be part of the constitution making process. And her contributions is what inspired some of us to go into public leadership, public spaces. We saw an opportunity that a woman can also be there.
Yeah.
She fought for the return of multi-party politics in this country, right from CA, the debates, the walkout, and she created a legacy for women leadership in political parties in this country. She has been, at the time just before her demise, she has been passionate about the plight of teenage mothers. She has been so many things. A mother, a mentor. Her story really is endless. The fight she has put up, the best that we can do is to pull up our socks as the women leaders and try to fit in the gap that she has left and keep her legacy going.
No doubt.
Our condolences to the family.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, now that we have done the needful, and of course may the soul of the late Honorable Cecilia Ogwal continue to rest in eternal peace. This entire week will be a thread of events leading up to her interment. That will be on Saturday. It should be on the weekend, and of course we shall be following that step by step, day by day, and TV shall be bringing you the updates as and how things happen. Now, one would say, for example, that if at all the Uganda People's Congress could have managed to return to power after the ouster by the two generals in 1985, by any chance, and the likes of Cecilia Ogwal had taken up the mantle of leadership, either within the realm of President, Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, her voice and ability to articulate matters would have given us some kind of respect and another posture on the international stage. This would be good for our negotiating abilities. Wouldn't it work well that such abilities were not exclusively used, or we didn't really get the very best that we should have gotten out of her, especially the fact that she missed being within the administration of government and being confined to the opposition? Would her abilities lend credence to aspects like deliberations on the tenure and the thrust for NAM?
Well, I can't say because we haven't seen it, but of course, given the performance that she has done so well on the at the national level, I don't think I would have any doubt about her capacities being deployed at the international scene, and therefore, of course, she hasn't been given, apart from being part of the Pan-African Parliament. That was the farthest extent she could go in as far as international politics is concerned. But otherwise, on the national level, I think she has done very well. As to whether that could have been replicated,
we are actually indebted
at the international scene, probably that's something we have missed, or and we're not able to see it. So it's extremely difficult for me to
understand.
Really gauge
not that I want to put you in any difficult position. All right, so on debt restructuring, let's return to the fact that Museveni, President Museveni, is chairman of NAM and should be able to lead the push for debt restructuring. Uganda's own performance when it comes to debt repayment has been controversial, but like Doctor said, there is the tendency not to show or be seen to be doing something about it. We are nearing the end of this particular discussion. I would like to give each of you a minute or two to get away from the concrete aspects of NAM and go on to the layman. I was talking earlier about the fact that we do not seem to have a plan for the average Ugandan when it comes to international conferences. How we benefit. Ugandans, we have a tendency to want to see things happen in a way that we're used to. Priscilla called it twagala kagwirawo, you know. And I was saying, if conferences can be planned in such a way that there is a specific stretch of land, either along the roads that lead up to the convention centers, to allow for at least 500 Ugandans to cook food, the various culinary aspects that we have in Uganda for the delegates who are coming, and then security is provided, and people are told, instead of going for the continental breakfasts and the lunches and the dinners, try out something like street food. The Rolex, we've wanted to sell it so much. Can't that be done for every conference that comes? So that if Chris Higenyi was co-opted in for one, then the next Priscilla can also go and do some good stuff, and then the next another person does that, so that we begin to understand that, oh, when a conference is coming, we are going to host so many people in the country, this is how the average Ugandan will. And then we avoid the controversies that we see, vendors, KCCA, government, stuff like that. What are your options, or rather opinions with that?
Well, I think for me, the way the big meetings affect ordinary people is in the opposite. They are moved off the streets. They are kept away, hidden away from guests. The Kampala business district now, there are no border borders. We have had a debate on regulation of border borders and where they can have access or not. But because of our twisted politics, that implementation has always failed.
Very good.
But we see it fit to clean up the guests, including pushing out border borders, street vendors, and the rest of it when guests are here. Why don't we make a city viable for us as citizens instead of stage managing things for the sake of guests? Why don't we create a central business district that is away from border borders? All cities do that. There are areas where border borders cannot access. Why don't we create that as part of the regulations? Why don't we clean up the city to make it good for us for daily use as citizens? Do we have to wait for guests to clean up the city? Those are two things that I really want to express my departure from, and it's bad conduct that we should move away from. We did it during Chogam, we do it every other time. Can't we create a city that is viable for citizens and guests and can host everybody at any given moment, instead of these rushed decisions to throw away the poor and privileged just because a guest is coming and they should be hidden away? Why don't we make decisions that make everybody have a position? Like in Ghana, they say Ghana has carried through a slogan that Accra belongs to the ordinary people. So when you go to Ghana, of course it will strike you as a disorganized city, depending on where you are. The Mwananchi is in the middle of the city. Yeah. The central bank is next to their big market, their Owino. So you have these structures. The Kwame Nkrumah Presidential Library is closer to the ordinary people. Like in our setup in Owino. When you go to every part of the city, you see the city has the upscale, but also the ordinary people, part of the city. So why don't we create these decisions and implement them through? If we want a central business district that is the way it is today, let's keep it, but also let's create spaces for the other people.
Ambassador Mayiga, I'm sure you would say this is what is ongoing.
The proposition is good, especially the angle she has brought it.
Okay.
That, look, for instance, when it comes to the culinary aspects, that can't we create some opportunity by the roadside and so on, so that people can take some chomo chikomanda, all these things. That one is...
Hey, a Japanese...
It's a very good...
An Indonesian can do with some katogo.
I can agree with her up to probably something like 60%.
Yeah.
But the other 40%
very quickly
of ensuring that the security of the visitors that come to a country is assured 100%, that one is not something that you can compromise.
You can't compromise.
Even when the UN is taking place in New York, the streets are cleaned. In Dubai, where I work,
we see our presidents walking to the UN from
Dubai,
our embassies.
Absolutely. In Dubai, where I work, it's the same story. I mean, even if it is a bike has, race, they clear the streets and so on, so to make sure that people are safe, people are secure. Extremely important. So that's why I'm saying that I can agree with her up to 60%. About 60%.
Okay, it's good enough.
Take care of these interests.
It's good enough.
Absolutely.
All right. Many thanks, Ambassador Henry Mayiga, our Consul General in Dubai, for the perspectives that you've just shared on exactly what President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni and indeed Uganda must embark on since we've taken on chairmanship of the non-aligned movement. And many thanks to you too, Dr. Sarah Bireete, Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance. We are always emboldened by your perspective on matters politics and economics. That will do it for the Kickstarter discussion, but do stay with us. Priscilla Regina Naloga shall be at hand discussing building bridges and investing in change for the Commonwealth.